Hi, everyone. So I'm Sam, and I'm a design researcher at Standby, which is I'm in London, but it's based in London and Amsterdam. But before I get into what Standby does and visual design research, just a bit about me. I have a sort of mixed background. I did my BA in sociology and my master's in interaction design. And I think for me, that's really sort of where my interests combine is then in design research, which is this mix of a social science approach to looking at new and emerging technologies and going about that through in-depth qualitative research. So looking at Standby and the work that we do there, we always start with this question, which is how can we connect organizations with the lives and experiences of their customers to enable designers to step into the shoes of others? And we go about trying to answer this question through design research. And we see this as qualitative research that's really rooted in the design of future services and products. So a lot of the times it'll happen in the very early stages of a product where a client team doesn't even know exactly what they want to make, but they know the general area they want to explore, like wearable technology, for example. And so it's a very broad, open-ended starting point, but the idea is to do design at that early stage. And there are a couple of things that we always keep in mind when we're doing design research. And the first thing is that people are always at the center of the process. So it's about not being technology driven, but about letting people lead the process, whether it's the participants that you interview or the client team that you're working with. It's always about keeping people at the center. And it's also about doing co-creative research so that it's not just us as researchers going into the field and interviewing people, but it's also the participants themselves sharing with us their stories. It's a shared process, and it's also a shared process with the client team as well. So it's not just us doing all the research and then going to them and providing feedback and insights, but it's about incorporating them throughout. It's also about empowering innovation, so looking at how we can shake things up, how we can make it different. Doing that by generating these insights with client teams. Doing that by making engaging materials that keep people interested and revisiting it when they're doing the design work. And it's also about supporting the client team so that they can actually implement their ideas and the results of our research. And sort of the final thing that we keep in mind at Standby is the value of doing cross-cultural or global design research. So although we're based in London and Amsterdam, we're part of a larger network that Standby co-founded called the Reach Network. So the idea is that, as much as we love to travel as researchers and go to different places, there's value in having a network of small companies, which is what Reach is, that are based in different cities around the world. So if we're doing research in India, for example, it's not just us in the field doing the research, but it's people that live there that have that local lived knowledge. And in terms of the larger design process that we use, I'm guessing that some of you have seen this and maybe are familiar with it, but we like to look at the double diamond design process. And the main thing to look at here is just that it's this process of divergence and then convergence. And looking at how, as you go through these stages of a design process, you go through phases where there's more, you're opening it up, and then there's phases where you come back down and narrow it in. And what's important for us is to look at, and what perhaps isn't often shown on this diagram, is that research and design can happen concurrently and benefit from happening at the same time. And that happens throughout the entire process. So there's value in research not just taking place right before and right after a design of a product or service happens, but about it happening throughout. And about this process itself being iterative. So it doesn't necessarily just have to happen one time. You can go through this process again and again. So sort of stepping back before talking about how we do visual design research at Standby, it's important to address the question, why is the visual important in the first place? For this talk, I'm thinking about visual in terms of photography and film in research, but I think that you could even broaden up the definition of visual to include all sorts of media, collage, painting, drawing, sculpture. I think there's a lot of potential with all these kinds of things, but we have been looking at how we can use photography and film mainly when we do research. So keeping that in mind, to sort of address why we think photography and film is important in design research. The first thing that comes to mind for me is that it can capture real lived messy experiences. So what do I mean by that is having a photo like this. It's showing someone's actual bedroom, their desk, and all of the stuff that they have, how they actually live. It's not this staged, polished image. It's messy. It's disorganized to an outsider viewer, at least. And it's about getting snapshots like these sometimes that capture how someone's actually living in their environment. Also, snapshots like these also help to promote someone to just step into someone else's shoes. It's about using this kind of visual material to get designers to see from someone else's perspective. So for someone that keeps their living space super organized, for example, looking at this gives you another idea of how someone else keeps their space. And it's also about contrasting it to images like this that are, of course, like pleasing to look at. They can show design trends and ideals, but it's also super edited and clean, and it doesn't show how someone might actually live in that space. And kind of going along with that, something as mundane as stationary items. We all like to look at these super organized images of nice stationery laid out, but it's not sort of any picture of reality. Nobody keeps their stationery laid out like this. Sometimes surfaces in your room can look like this. So it's about seeing that contrast and using it as inspiration for design, because it's about how people, actually live. It's also about looking at these images and being able to revisit them and analyze them again. So, for example, you could look at this image and you kind of see a sink in the background, and you're kind of thinking, why is there a sink there? Why is there alcohol next to the cookies, next to the pens? It gives you a space to explore. That's also the value of images over just field notes, for example, or just written text, which I think is really nice. And then it's also looking at these images that show our future with technology. So something like this that just shows the sort of flexible LED screen. A lot of these images we always see are in these sort of super clean, white, pristine environments. It always looks like someone's in a lab. And maybe most importantly, it always looks like everything is super straightforward, very seamless, really easy. But images that kind of come from field work where people share their stories tend to look really different from that, of course. This is from field work where we spoke with a man in China who he's been using his same phone for 10 years. And what he does is every now and then he opens up the entire phone and he cleans all the little things in between the keys. So it's these little stories like this that actually really shed light on how real people are living. It's not this future. It could be this future, but what's happening right now is sometimes something that looks more like this. So that's a sort of benefit of having photographs that tell these stories. Something else that's also very important about photography and film is that it enables you to promote empathy. So a photographer that comes to mind is the photographer Maartje van Gestel, and she's a Dutch photographer that focuses on photography for design research, she's filling a very niche field and a relative void because there aren't a lot of people focusing on how photography can be used in this context. And she worked on a project called Gray But Mobile, which looked at how an older generation can live mostly alone, how they deal with that, how they deal with still getting around, whether it's at home or around to different places throughout their daily lives. And looking at the medium of photography and how she uses it, it really shows how it can promote empathy, not just between a participant and a researcher, but also between the participant and then those that view the material later on. And I think that's really important because it's not just about what happens during field work, but it's about having this visual material to share with others what you found out and to share the experiences of these people. So I thought this was a really nice quote that she said, "People should lead the story process, not the products or mobility problems. While the photos had to have analytical value, they should also be emotional and have human value too." It's again about keeping people at the center of the process, especially in the photos themselves. And she told a nice story about when she was doing this research. She was sort of taking pictures in the beginning and felt like she wasn't really capturing something that was really going on. And then she told this story about how the phone rang and the woman went to go answer the phone. And then she continued to just take photos, even though that wasn't the focus of the interview, and found out that it was much more natural. She was getting much more authentic photographs, and she started playing around with perspective. So you can see the photo on the left, she's taking it from the doorway, and you get the sense that you really are peeking in. You're getting a chance to see into someone's very personal space, their bedroom, while she takes a call. So it's about being able to provide that first-person perspective and also getting a sense of how someone actually just lives their lives, which is important. And the visual is also important because it allows you to tell stories, especially with film. You're very easily able to craft a narrative and then share that with people. So these are stills from a film, which I'll show you in a little bit. They're about a man, Desmond, who he has a favorite record shop in Notting Hill in London. And he shares with us his experience about what's so important to him about the store and what he loves about it. And it's these sort of combinations of being able to really follow someone through this story that really, it makes you feel like you're there with them. And it gives you this really nice sense of what they like to do. So something else that's also what makes working with visual material fun is that you can be creative with it. There are so many possibilities and ways that you can use this sort of material. So with the increase in technologies around cameras like GoPros, the whole trend towards life logging, wearing these small clip cameras, it provides a lot of different ways you can go about doing visual design research. So this is just an example of using a GoPro, whether you're just doing something as mundane as washing the dishes or cycling or running. This quite literally gives you a first-person perspective on how someone does certain things. And it can be really valuable to use that, whether it's through photography or film, to inspire design based on real lived experience. And this is just an image of showing we've been trying to experiment and play around with different angles and ways of using wearable cameras. So, we'll go out just for ourselves to see then how we want to use it in research. We'll wear the camera maybe here or maybe on your forehead or even on your back just to experiment and see what happens. So this is just us sort of doing a run in a supermarket to just see what comes back, see what kinds of visual material are useful and how we can use them. And something else that makes collecting photographs really interesting is that now with things like not just Instagram, but things like Flickr that are still alive and well and people are posting. So this is from a Flickr group called What's in My Bag, which is also not exactly related, but there's also a book that tries to get at the same thing. But people will post like the contents of their bag just laid out so you can see what they normally take around with them. And since it's an open group in Flickr, you just get people from all over the world posting what's inside of their bag. And, one photo on its own is even interesting. This is just an example of a photo of a construction worker, what he brings with him every day. But, you go through the group and you see this whole series of images, and a larger story emerges that's not just about that one person's belongings. It becomes about what people in general bring with them every day. It becomes about how people in different places in the world carry around their stuff, what kinds of stuff they bring. So it's not only about you taking photographs and making films, but it can also be about looking at these repositories of images that are already available and seeing how they can function as design research. So while you can also look at the existing photos that are already there, I think it's also really helpful to just take photos sometimes of things that you may find interesting. Because this is just one photo that I took of just exposed cables and wires in India, which then became something that I kept noticing. So you notice something once, you take a photo, and then maybe it allows you to see an emerging trend or thing that you're able to then capture visually. That you can tell someone, yeah, I saw all these exposed wires and different things, but then if you have a series of images, you're able to reflect back on it in a way that you can't necessarily with words. And there is this power in series to capture, whether it's with wires or with photos of people on the street, you're capturing certain patterns in behavior. There definitely is this sort of power in series to show these trends. But a series of photographs can also tell a story and be used to create a narrative. So while this series of images tells a certain story, something like this set of images tells a different story. So even though it's using some of the same photographs, it tells a different story because of the other images there. It's now about comparing sort of photographs taken inside and outside the home, and taken in different areas as well. So some were taken in India, some were taken in the Netherlands. So you can play around with what images you show where and how you show them in order to tell different stories. So this is taking a look at how Standby does visual design research. We like to use the visual of a pyramid to show an important aspect that in our work, when we go from doing field work, analyzing the data we get back, and then strategizing and generating opportunities from it, the idea is that whatever lands in that top of the pyramid can always be traced back to the actual observed data from fieldwork. And having it grounded in fieldwork is really important. That's what makes it strong. But I wanted to sort of just show an example of how Standby uses the visual throughout the process in different ways. So looking at an example of how we've done fieldwork, this is an example of research we did on mobile phones that was in 3 different countries. It was in India, China, and UK. And the main question, we were looking at how people use their mobile phones, what they use them for, what they struggle with, what they like in particular. But it was also more than that. It was about how their phone fits into their daily lives, what other activities they do, and what other devices they may own. So I think this photo is a good example of a photo that has value for this kind of research because it's a portrait photo. It shows his particular device, and so it right away gives you a sense to who this person is we spoke to and the device he has. And photos like this are also valuable. They show up close the device that someone has on them all the time, and you can from a design perspective you can see things like the wear and tear, the color, the casing, things like that. But there are other photos that are just as valuable that aren't as explicitly around him using his phone. Other photos of his home and his environment, they shed light on the other things that he does, in the kitchen with his family. This is something that he does every day. Photos that show someone's neighborhood around the home are also valuable. It just helps to give a broader sense of someone's life and what they do than just these photos of the phone, for example. Right, so photos like this, they help to paint a better picture, a more well-rounded picture of someone. And we also were able to follow him, so it's not just in the home, but places that he frequents, like a shop, or being able to speak with his friends as well. And he shared with us stories about how he likes to get music from friends, how his friends give him tips on how to use his phone, and so they're exchanging SIM cards. And then he also has a paper notebook where he writes down all of the numbers that he stores in his phone because he's afraid that if he loses his phone, then he won't have a backup. So he keeps this paper directory of numbers. And he was also sharing with us how he particularly likes to listen to music when he's driving. It's all these little stories and things that, if you have this collection of photographs, you're able to look back on it and re-immerse yourself in the story. So kind of going from that to the next phase of a project, which would be analysis, I wanted to show an example of something that's film instead of photography because we use both. And then it just depends on the project. Sometimes we use photography primarily, sometimes film, sometimes a combination. But I wanted to show with this example of the film that I'm going to show, which is about the man Desmond, who you saw earlier, is that both the editing of the film itself is a form of analysis, and then the film itself is a unit of analysis, which is really important because it helps to keep your research systematic and structured. So when looking at this film, I just want to note that normally we'll edit down films to about 2 to 3 minutes that come from a 2-hour interview. So of course it can't get at everything, but I'll just to give you a sense.
We're on the corner of Portobello Road and I think Lancaster Road. So we're outside Honest John's record shop, my library, where I buy virtually all my music from. And Falafel King, where I normally go for a bite to eat. Up here tends to be my favourite end. You've got some nice shops, and the quality of the clothing tends to be better as well. Sion Sean is still selling vinyl. Now he's gone to CDs. Yeah, what I love, you can come in here, and at the moment they're playing reggae, could be soul, could be jazz, could be anything. And if you look along the walls, there's homage to 70s blaxploitation movies with Kofi, Dennis Brown. I remember I went to art school and I was a bit perplexed as to how does an individual become creative, or how do they produce a wonderful piece of work. And I realised that you have to get inside people's head to understand what comes out of their head. So you need to have an insight into where they were born, the constraints around them, with its religion or culture or war or famine or money or lack of money, and you develop a better appreciation or perspective on pieces of work. And they've got a big picture of Miles Davis on the wall, so it tells you they have a pedigree when it comes to music. Oh, the temptation is really bad. I think I need to step out this place very slowly. I could spend hours, which I have actually spent hours in this shop, and I lost many a girlfriend, unfortunately.
In this shop?
Yeah, in this shop. They want to go to a shop which sells ladies' wear, and I want to buy music. Obviously, there's going to be a clash, especially if I'm not willing to compromise. But that was then. But, now I've learned to tone down a bit. Oh, no, we must leave. We must leave. They're very clever because they will compliment you on your selection of music, and as you make a move to the door, they start playing some music, which starts the whole process over again. So you're leaving there having spent like £100, and you're going to come back the following week and do the same thing over and over again. And when you need a place to live, they might give you the basement if you're lucky.
Yeah. So I think that's a really nice example, just showing you how films can really give you a sense of a slice of someone's life. It may not be anything completely shocking or groundbreaking, but that's not the point. It's really about having someone tell you their story. And even the sort of format of the filmmaking, he's speaking to the camera, and it gives it this very personal feel to it, which adds, it helps you step into his shoes. So like I was saying, that film itself then becomes a unit of analysis. So for a project like this, we might have 15 films that are sort of in the similar format. The idea is that, you define how you're going to edit the films in a systematic way so that then all of the films can be compared and contrasted. And then from that, you can generate insights and patterns. So this is just to give you a sense of what happens then with these films after we edit them. We may watch them in groups, watch them alone. The point is to rewatch them again to see if you notice new things. And then to also get your ideas up on a board. So using Post-it notes, stickers, and it helps you to get them up on the wall and organize them, see what comes out of them. The main thing, and when you're trying to sort of come up with a system for how you're going to go about editing films, for example, is that the structure of the films lines up with the research question. So, for example, with the film of Desmond, it's a film where it's just with one person and it's telling one story. So that will hold true for the rest of the films from this particular research. But in a different project, it could be compilation films that cut across participants and share more than one story, and that are maybe edited according to theme, for example. So then, kind of going through this pyramid to the last stage, which would be when you're at strategy. You have the patterns and insights, and now you want to be able to share them in a way and communicate them in a way that is both effective and engaging. And it's almost, if you effectively use photography or film in the fieldwork and in the analysis, it can almost go to waste if then you don't, again, use these visual elements in a way for when you are at this stage of a project. So this is just an example of sort of how visual research can be communicated. It's just through a printed publication, for example. So this was a research project that focused a lot on photography to capture both on the street, using street photography to look at fashion, and also visiting people's homes to look at their different possessions, things that they keep in their room. But a printed publication like this is a really nice way to gather and organize photos and then have it in a format that you can distribute and that also you can revisit for future inspiration. And another thing that you can do is set up an exhibit. It's a really nice way to immerse people in your research and to keep it visual. So this, for example, was a project where we had an exhibit that both used posters but also films. So you present the films in that kind of setting and have people walk around and explore the space. I think one of the main things about that last phase is also just that a lot of people are used to maybe reading drier written reports coming back from research, and that being the only material that they see. But it provides a really nice contrast to also have written things can also be very telling and share insights. But in addition, to have visual material keeps it much more engaging and interesting for people. And also, if you do a project that has a lot of film material, you can use things like Vimeo, YouTube. For photographs, you can use Flickr and kind of maintain more of a living repository of this sort of material. It also enables people to upload their own material depending on the project, and it makes it much more interesting to revisit as well. So bringing it back to this process of visual design research and how we think about it, I mentioned this a bit before, but it's about the fact that you don't have to just go through it in one way. You know, the arrows point both ways. If you look at sort of on the left are the things that we do, and on the right are the sort of results from that, you can kind of you can go up the pyramid and back down, and the idea is that everything remains connected and traceable so that it's grounded in the actual fieldwork we do for research. So whether it's a website that you make for a research project or a book, it's the things that you find within that, you could also find within the structured data that you get back from your fieldwork, for example. And just in general, I mean, I think it's a exciting time to be trying to push this kind of design research forward, because while keeping it structured and systematic, there's also a lot of room for creativity. Like I was saying, you can experiment with different kinds of equipment and technology, whether it's, you know, wearable cameras, a life logging camera, even a selfie stick for different perspectives. You know, there's a lot of room to see sort of what kind of material you can generate and what kind of stories you can tell with it. And I think at Standby we try to ask ourselves different questions as we're going through a design research project. So it can be things like, what perspective to take photos from. Like I touched upon earlier, you know, is it peering through someone's door to give you that feeling that you're looking into their lives? Is it a face-on perspective? Is it an aerial perspective? Just even a question like that, you know, you can look at how you're communicating things visually. And I touched upon this as well, but something like a series, you know, what photos do you want to include? How do you want to present them? What story are you telling through that series of photographs? And also, for something like film, how can we go about editing films in different ways? Do we want it to be a compilation film? Do we want it to focus on one participant? So there are all these kinds of questions to ask yourself as you go about research. So I think, you know, we try to keep these in mind as we go through, and also to continue to think about the sort of new ways that we can use photography and film in design research, which I think we're very much looking forward to doing. So, yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you so much.